Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this to another level.
To me, it's agile through the value chain. That's what I'm looking for organizational agility. I mean, most organizations we start with dev or IT. That seems to be like the natural home for agile for a lot of companies. But I mean, if you stop there, you're not really going to achieve the kind of desired outcomes as a business we probably want. We may get our dev and IT groups to be, highly efficient at being agile, but they live within an ecosystem. And unless that ecosystem itself is aligned, all we're going to have is sort of a mismatch.
Who is Ken Rubin, and how did you get into this agile training, coaching, consulting business? Maybe give us, not many people I think know who Ken Rubin is and how much you've contributed to our community. So if you could please share like how you got into this space and tell us maybe what your journey has been and who Ken is.
It's great to be here with you today.
Thank you.
My background's pretty straightforward. I started off as a software engineer. First of all my degrees are in computer science, typical path through companies. I was a developer, a project manager, VP of engineering. I was also VP of marketing, VP of sales, running a number of smaller software companies. I've done 10 startups in my career, took 2 of them public on NASDAQ. The last was back in 2000 during that really crazy period of time. I did a 2-year tour of duty with IBM in the mid 1990s where I had a 130 person team. We'd run around North America building large distributed object systems. And that's really my starting point, not at IBM, but if you go back to the late 1980s, I helped bring Smalltalk out of the research labs at Xerox PARC, and we formed a startup company called Park Place Systems. And anybody who's old enough to remember that will recall that we were sort of early market, object-oriented, development languages, development tools, class libraries. And that's really where Agile started for me. I think a lot of people know that a good part of the Agile community finds its roots back to Smalltalk development. Actually, I started doing Smalltalk development back in 1986 before I joined Park Place. They just hired me in because I had Smalltalk experience, which was rare back in 1988. And so I've been doing Agile since the early 1990s. In terms of the training and consulting part, at Park Place, initially I was the training and consulting department until I grew it. And so basically from 90 to 95, I ran the training and consulting department at Park Place. And so we had a team of people who go out and we would train people in Smalltalk and object-oriented development and what was sort of the forerunner of core Agile principles. First time I ever did something like Scrum was in 2000, formally. At that time, I was working for a startup in Colorado called Genomica, and we built software for statistical genetics, some fairly sophisticated life scientist software. And I inherited a team of about 90 people, wasn't functioning all that well. We gave Scrum a try, and that worked out much better for us. So it's now 21 years of doing Scrum and Kanban and doing coaching along the way. So that's sort of my roots in all of this.
So what is it? Maybe just something that triggered a thought in my head, which is like you have Boston area where Jeff and Ken were, and then you have Denver, and there's a lot of history around Agile and Scrum in Denver. Was there anybody particular that you kind of partnered with, or it was just something that was evolved kind of naturally? So like, did you partner with anybody like Mike Cohn or anybody that's in that area early on?
I did. I mean, so I left California in 1995 and came out to Colorado, took that job with IBM, which was what brought me out here. Over the course of time, when I first got here, after I left IBM and went to this company eventually to Genomica, one day, the day my son was born in 2000, I was in the hospital room. My wife had just given birth. I got called by the CEO, said, "You need to come to the board of directors meeting." I'm like, okay, my wife's like in the bed next. We needed the board of directors meeting. So I went to the board of directors meeting down in Boulder, and they go, "Yeah, we just fired the VP of engineering. And in addition to your other responsibilities," I was sort of the equivalent of like COO So I
Yeah.
ran a lot of the other groups, and she's like, now you need to run engineering. You're allowed to hire a new VP of engineering if you want. And I highly suggest that you do. And so I ended up hiring Mike Kung.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so Mike came in, we worked together at that point, and that's how we introduced Scrum into Genomica back in 2000. And for people who are familiar with the Colorado Front Range, which is the part just east of the Rocky Mountains here, it is an intensely agile area.
It is.
There is
Yeah.
a lot of agile talent out here. And so it's been a great place to live for the past 26 years, right?
Mhm.
Just involved with all that. Park Place was actually in the Bay Area. So in the early days, it was all Bay Area. But
Mhm.
really for the past 25 years, I've been in Colorado.
Well, especially agile, I think, and in terms of, how we know agile is, today, it's there's a lot of, even Scrum Alliance offices, headquarters are there. So it is interesting. So thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. I just assumed that there probably was collaboration and a lot of kind of sharing going on, given that, just there's so much going on there. How do you define business and organizational agility? There's, different people define it differently. What is it? How do you look at business agility, organizational agility?
It's a great question. I mean, so to me, it's the ability of an organization to inspect and adapt, right?
Mhm.
To succeed in sort of a rapidly changing and most certainly ambiguous, and one of my favorite terms, turbulent environment.
Mhm.
And I got to tell you, I mean, the past 20 months have been the most amazing test of anybody's organizational agility, right?
Mhm.
If you weren't inspecting and adapting over the past 20 months as an organization, sadly, you might not be here. When I think of the restaurants around me here in Colorado, some really good restaurants are gone, just gone. They didn't adapt. They weren't very agile organizationally. Others that were predominantly sit-down restaurants realized that's a going out of business strategy last year, and they pivoted to do a good job of takeout. So that involved a lot. That involved the executive team being involved. It involved the people on the ground who actually have to do the work. So by its nature, organizational agility pervades more than just
Mhm.
one group. I mean, let me ask you a question. What if I said this to you? I have an idea. It's a great way to build software. You'll believe it's a much better approach than how you've been doing it in the past. And your goal should be to adopt this, and you're going to be really, really successful. Was I talking about Agile?
No. I
Actually, I
mean,
was.
in a way, but like what I'm thinking and what you're making me think is like how, like, just change, and how, like, nobody was talking about what you need to do in the last 20 months. It's just like you gotta adapt, and do you have that ability or not? And do you and that's really what it was about. Nobody cared what you did. It's just, it was are you going to change or not? If you don't change, and for a lot of companies it was, and businesses, it was, to survive or not. Which makes me think about, we talk about like change takes time, change, when we, at least, the way that I've perceived a lot of times, it just in my own experience in large organizations. But the last 20 months have made me think about, it can happen really quickly if you have the right people and the right desire to change.
The right mindset. I mean,
uh,
I think people who are inherently very, nimble in their thinking were able to adapt very quickly, right? I mean, so when I think about it, to me, it's agile through the value chain. That's what I'm looking for organizational agility. I mean, most organizations we start with dev or IT. That seems to be like the natural home for agile for a lot of companies. But I mean, if you stop there, you're not really going to achieve the kind of desired outcomes as a business we probably want. We may get our dev and IT groups to be, highly efficient at being agile, but they live within an ecosystem. And unless that ecosystem itself is aligned, all we're going to have is sort of a mismatch throughout. It's like, oh yeah, we're agile over here, but over there, finance does its own thing, and legal does its own thing, and you can just kind of go through all the groups. And marketing and sales, it keeps pushing more work into development, right? You get the idea. So organizational agility is the ability to step back, look at the big picture, and understand as a system, are we able to inspect and adapt it to really to the environment in which we have to operate, which right now still is a COVID environment.
Yeah. It's interesting because the reason that I ask, I was talking to Evan from Business Agility Institute, and I was asking him, I was looking at the report from last year, and there were three things. It was leadership, mindset, not necessarily tied to the leadership, but just mindset overall, and silos that were identified as the biggest constraints to business agility. And you've done a lot of work with a lot of different organizations. You train a lot of people. I was looking, you trained over 30,000 people. You've worked with several hundred companies. What are things that you see that are impeding organizational agility? Are those same things, or do you see something different, or maybe just a different perspective? I'm curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think those labels are good ones. I mean, I approach it maybe a slightly different way. I mean, for me, organizations have an inertia. They've been doing something for a while, and it's hard to stop that. And for some people, I guess they would call that a cultural impediment. Like, culturally, we're not aligned with doing this. That tends to be a fairly big issue in a lot of companies that I visit. It's like, well, that's not how we have done things. We're comfortable. If they're in a regulated environment, there's even more of that. Because we know we can pass an audit if we do it this way. Not sure if we make a change to that. And that aligns with sort of the siloed idea. Most organizations are, by their construction, very siloed, which works against this concept of achieving organizational agility. This idea that we should be able to go across the silos and include everybody that we need to get the job done. On that leadership one, I view that as sort of like a lack of commitment at the top of the house. This idea that, hey, we're gonna start doing Agile at the team level, and then maybe it percolates up a little bit further, and eventually you just hit a ceiling.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't have the right kind of commitment, which I do think aligns with Evan's leadership one, you won't get there. And then there's this, I guess they're just myopic, right? Myopic in the sense of it's about dev and IT, right? I mean, that's where we should be focusing our time. And we've already argued organizational agility is by its definition larger than just that. And
do you think it's ignorance or lack of understanding? Because like I see that too, and a lot of times it's really like lack of understanding about what organizational agility is and what are the enablers and what it takes. And it's almost like the Peter principle, like, in a sense, a lot of times people have gotten to these executive positions, but they really, a lot of times don't fully understand the concept of systems, right? And understanding the systems and how to structure, like even business architecture. And that kind of can be impediment because if you're not willing to make those structural changes, those policy changes as leaders, then like you said, it's only going to go so far.
I do think, I agree with that. I think it's a natural consequence of where we are in the adoption curve. I mean, if you think about Jeff Moore's work on crossing the chasm, and this idea that, you got your early adopters, right? You get your visionaries, then you kind of get to like the early majority, the late majority, things like that. Agile and dev and IT is clearly across the chasm. I mean, almost any company you talk to today says they're probably doing something Agile-like. And you've even hit the late majority. The people are like, I don't move until everybody else moves. They're moving, right? But that's in dev and IT. If you start broadening beyond that, I mean, the Scrum Alliance used to do a survey, right? Of, where are you using Scrum in addition to dev and IT? And you start to see things like, well, HR or finance or legal or marketing, things of that type. I would suggest that we've been in the chasm on that for a while. So you said, is it sort of like an ignorance issue? It's not malice, right? I don't think it's not a malintent. I think it's like, I thought it was about dev and IT, right? And now you're telling me it can be broader than that. Where are the examples? Point me to, because remember, if you're an early adopters don't care. They're the ones making the examples. Early majority, though, is like, I don't move until I see the proof points where other companies have done it. I think we're getting more and more of this. So you could argue organizational agility is coming out of the chasm to the other side, but it's been in the chasm for a long time, years. And I think that's one of the bigger inhibitors right now.
Another, I agree. And so if we also look at it from Agile, like, in the framework side, we've been on that side where, like, give me the recipe, and people are realizing that just, one size does not fit all. Where do you think on that curve we are with frameworks, and coming back maybe to small talk and patterns? Do you think people are, or where are companies with realizing that it's really contextualizing things, understanding my context, not just saying, give me safe or give me this framework, and thinking that there's this, cookie cutter of a methodology, what's called, or framework?
I think there's a great desire for frameworks. I mean, Scaled Agile has proved that, right? I mean, you put out a framework and it's well pictured, right? People look at it, and it appeals to a certain class of individuals. But I'm finding I got a request the other day from a company. I signed a contract with them to do work. They go, okay, I want to talk about your framework for adopting Agile. I'm like, framework, okay. Are you expecting these large pictures like you're used to seeing? I mean, because every time I go into an organization to be of some assistance, there are certain things that we talk about, and it seems to be a theme, but every company is different. And any company that's ever told me we're going to use framework X, what they really meant by that is we will mine framework X for good ideas.
Okay. Yeah.
It's rare that I encounter a company that's like, oh, we went all in. In fact, I did a survey on LinkedIn, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, where I asked the question, when it comes to one of these scaling frameworks, don't use them at all. That got a pretty high response rate, right? Use it, but mine it for good ideas. That got the most.
Yeah.
And use it in textbook-like fashion. That was like 4%.
Yeah.
Right, of like the multiple hundreds of people that responded to the survey. So I think it's clear where the industry is on frameworks, but people like them. People want them, right? And to the extent that they're a source of good ideas, why not? All right, mine them for good ideas and create something that is culturally a good fit for your organization.
So maybe to use analogy, like, you can mine a cookbook for good recipes, but if you don't know what you're doing, in a sense of like, if you're putting custom recipes together and you're like, these are the ingredients that I have. And a lot of times in organizations, it can be very appealing. Like, even let's just say, PI planning is safe, right? Oh, it's a great idea, makes sense. But if I don't fully understand the context that pattern or practice has been put into place, then you have an issue a lot of times. And this is what I see in organizations, where you have cooks that think they are chefs implementing this stuff and making something that, somebody will say, well, if this is Agile, if this is it, I don't want a part of it. Is that also part of that kind of just natural curve of just trying things out and figuring out? If it is, could we assume that better days are ahead in context that we've been learning over the last 10 years, that, we do have to contextualize, that we can't rely just on cookie cutter frameworks, and that we do need to have people inside our companies that are capable of helping and guiding us, rather than, continuously relying on consultants like yourself and myself. Do you think we're heading in that direction? Do you think that's the right direction if we are?
So to back up to an earlier piece you were saying, I would describe what you were saying earlier as cargo cult. And that, I think, is the bigger problem today, is that people look at these frameworks and they adopt them. They don't really understand the underlying mechanisms, the underlying why that they're doing these things. It just becomes mechanics at that point. We do that. Well, why do you do that? Why do you do PI planning? What's the purpose of that? How do you manage your dependencies? Or why are you doing it that way? If you don't understand the foundational why that underlies these frameworks, you're in no position to do anything other than adopt them and just blindly follow them. I honestly, I had a call today with a company earlier today where they have an enterprise PMO that they put in place with the only reason of collecting all the data and holding everybody in compliance with the SAFe framework as they want to execute it, and which is supposed to be textbook like.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to the fellow on the phone, and he's like, I go, how's that working for you? He goes, oh, it's like remarkably painful, right? And we spend a lot of our time just doing things or not doing things, because if we do something, we'll be temporarily out of compliance with what we're supposed to be doing, and we'll look bad because of it, even though it was the right thing to have done. Like, oh, okay, then the framework's working against you, right, to do that. So now the good news about the person I was speaking with is he does not have a cargo cult mentality. He actually does understand the underlying fundamentals as to why we're doing that. Most people who are just getting started don't. So it's easy just to cargo cult the thing, right? And just follow it blindly and expect results to happen. It won't.
Yeah, and and that's part. And what I'm seeing also is people that have gone through that journey, from company to company. It's easier to work when you have somebody that has gone through that, has tried it, and now, like you said, understands it. And it makes it a lot easier, I guess, to work with those organizations where you have leadership that sees the perspective that you're trying to help them take. So. How do you scale end to end? Like, what are, we're talking about, scaling. Sometimes it's really about descaling, but what are your thoughts on end to end agility and scaling?
So this one's really important to me because when I go into companies, I'm really curious, how are they organizing? So what is their unit for organizing at scale? Right, because for example, the obvious one that a lot of companies use is projects. I'm like, what a horrible unit for trying to organize at scale, right? I mean, projects are by their nature fleeting, right? They start and they darn well better end, all right, at some point. It's kind of the idea behind a project. So if you want to start to think about scaling end-to-end agility, the first question every company should ask is, what's the proper unit for scaling? Is it a product? Is it an application? Is it a customer journey? Is it a business capability? If you're using SAFe, you're going to use a value stream, right? So you need some unit that you're going to focus on. And then the important part, and this is the critical piece for me, is you need to create something I call a coordinated ecosystem. And the idea behind that is I'm just trying to align, remember, end-to-end business agility. I'm trying to align against this durable business-focused unit. So if we're doing products, right, products ought to be customer-facing and long-lived, durable. So the first thing you want to do is align your ecosystems, right, with the instances of this durable unit, whatever it's going to be. Then you want sort of like cross-organizational alignment of resources. It's, the old analogy, get everybody on the bus necessary to do the job, right? We'll put them in an ecosystem. So if I need legal and compliance right in there, and I need, design and digital and all these other groups that aren't typically aligned with, the normal development teams, I need them there, then they ought to be brought into the ecosystem, bring everybody sort of together and encapsulate them.
So that's almost like, trying to minimize dependencies, trying to simplify things in many ways. So maybe before I do have some question on dependencies, but I wanted to get your thoughts since you brought it up, like, organizing by value streams or by, customer journeys or product services. Typically what I've seen, asking a question first, like, who are your customers and users, and then organize. And maybe that's, specifically for products, but how do you look at, even if you're coaching or maybe consulting, like, when is a good time, when is it good to organize by journeys or customer experiences versus product lines versus is that dependent on anything? Do you have any insight on that, or
could actually be usually companies choose one of the that they could. Occasionally I'll see companies do value streams or products and customer journeys, for example, because, like, for example, one organization that I'm working with has two separate conceptual entities that sort of naturally go together, call them A and B, but they have to do onboarding. And onboarding as a customer journey is pretty much the same, right? Maybe
Yeah.
with some minor differences. So do you really want to have onboarding be part of A and B, or do you want to just have like a third, which would be a customer journey of onboarding? It's the onboard a new customer journey.
Yeah.
And so they may still have two products, A and B, or two value streams, A and B, but they complement it with this sort of onboarding journey because it just makes sense to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking for, and by this is a remarkably difficult problem. I mean, people talk about it like it's like really easy. Oh, yeah, fine. We're going to organize around products. So my favorite question to ask is, cool, tell me what your products are. Just right now, just tell me what your products are. And you just watch people fumble. Well, it's this. Like, no, that's not a product. That's a component. Well, what about this? Well, that's not a product. It's like, I just asked you a simple question. What are your products? Now, some companies can answer that, and they can be pretty definitive about it, and they're going to have an easier time. I was at one company, it took us 3 months to identify the products. Big company. But I mean, so anybody's like, oh, let's have a brainstorming session this afternoon and we'll sort of pound out what the products are going to be. Yeah, good luck with that. Right? I mean, that usually doesn't go that smoothly, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But but it's easier you got to go down that path. You got to get away from projects. You'll need something. Whether applications tend not to be the best unit because you get sort of an inverse Conway problem. You start to organize your ecosystems around existing applications, which are already kind of like just this big quagmire of dependencies, a big ball of mud. It's like, why would I go out of my way to create ecosystems to match an application infrastructure that I have had for like decades? Exactly. Conway's law would say, your system's going to reflect the communication channels of the teams that built it. What you want to do is flip it.
Exactly.
Right? Here's what I want. This is the system structure I want. Maybe I create the ecosystems to get me to that. So there's a number of ways to approach it. Typically, products, value streams, business capabilities, or journeys are going to be your top choices. And you just have to figure out in your organization which one makes sense. If you're going to use SAFe, you're going to use value streams.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting because it reminded me, and maybe just to go back to what you were saying, like, so for instance, like onboarding, let's just say, this happens a lot. Like when I work with insurance companies, you might have a same onboarding process, right? Then you might have a dental insurance and vision insurance, right? So those could be separate. And what you're saying is the onboarding process could be the same for everybody, but somebody might just want vision and somebody might want dental, somebody might want all of those. But the other thing that's interesting too is what you brought up is systems. So like you can have same systems supporting both products and onboarding or different, and that's a good example of why you wouldn't want to organize by systems, because they're almost underlying and supporting those products or customer experiences. So that makes sense to me, and I think that's what I've seen also work well. And I don't know if that's a good example from your perspective, if that's what you meant. Yeah.
I mean, most systems, most companies today, at least the ones that I encounter, are doing some form of tech modernization. They're doing that because their system structure is not fit for purpose. If it was fit for purpose, they wouldn't be doing tech modernization. Yeah. And so there's an issue there. So why would you organize around that? Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I see is some companies, especially that have been around for too long, have too many products. And in a sense, like it's very difficult to organize when you have a lot of products and you can't prioritize and you have limited resources, from IT resources, human capability side. And sometimes it's tough to get to, in the insurance space, if you sold a plan, 30, 40 years ago, you can't, but in some instances, it's hard to let go of products. And sometimes the best thing is to kind of shred things off and focus on what your strategy is and do you see that too? Or where companies have just too much going on, too many things, products, whatever it is that they're supporting, and not enough capability and capacity.
Yeah, and I think that problem occurs along multiple dimensions, not just the physical number of products, but think about just the version, like you mentioned, like the 40 years it's been out there. So if you're a product-based company, one of your questions is, how many versions back do I support, right? And in the world of continuous delivery, what constitutes a version, right? So do you do it by time? we'll support something, a release that we did up to 18 months ago, and anything older than that, we don't. That way, we could be up giving you 5 updates a day. I don't know that I call those new versions, right? But but do you have to have the ability to spin up an environment to match a customer's environment for a system that was installed 15 years ago, so that you can try to replicate the problem? I've watched that particular issue cause enormous grief in companies. Like, oh, we spend so much of our time just trying to do this. Like, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. Oh, but we promised our customers. Yeah, maybe you need to make different promises.
And make some tough decisions when it comes to that. But that's another thing when, if you don't have somebody to say, like, this is what our direction is and vision, this is where the focus is, we have to have a strategy to either, get rid of these products or whatever. Just it's a strategic decision, but maybe that goes back to the silos. It's tough to say that unless you're, either president or part of the board that you're pushing. I don't know, but that's something that I see. Maybe to come back to the organizational dependencies. So you've recently written a lot about that. You've talked about that. What are organizational dependencies, and why are they important?
So this is, to me, dependencies are what's killing companies' ability to structure for flow at scale. And I define a dependency to be pretty simple. I got these 2 entities, 2 activities or resources, and there's a relationship between these 2, and it requires some level of coordination in order to achieve good flow. So that, to me, is what a dependency is. These 2 things have to collaborate, and we have to orchestrate this in a way that we get good flow. And if we don't, we could get blocked, which is where the problem comes in. And blocked in a way like my team's dependent on your team to do the work. And if your team doesn't get it done when you said you could, then my team is blocked and can't move forward. And that causes a lot of big problems. So these organizational dependencies, the problem is they tend to be woven into the fabric of most organizations. Now, those are the dependencies I call structural dependencies. Okay. It's the equivalent of like, hey, every time I need to do I need a UX design, I have to, we're Agile, right? We got to have Post-it notes, or it's just not Agile, right? That's the feature I want to deliver to a customer, but the UX design piece, I have to tear that off, and I have to go over and put it into the backlog of the UX design team. Well, if every time I have to get a design, I have to tear my Post-it note and go give it to the UX design team, I have a structural dependency on that. Meaning it's like woven into the fabric of how we're organized. And it means, and then I can use the complementary term, which is instantiated dependency. So if I have 50 different designs I need that team to do, each one is an instantiation of the structural link. It's like classes and instances, right? The structural dependency is the class, and the actual work, like, hey, design team, I need to design for the onboarding screen, right? And I go give that to them, then that's an instance of that dependency. Now imagine if you want to make real improvements in your organization, where you ought to be focusing your time is on the structural dependencies, not on the instantiated dependencies.
Almost like a root cause type of, yeah.
If I get rid of the structure, I mean, what if I moved a UX designer onto my team? So next time I have a Post-it note that pops up, right, I don't have to tear it up. I can just give it to the team and do it. I have eliminated all future instantiated dependencies. So that one move eliminated 50 instances of that dependency at some point in the future. So if you want to really get on top of your dependency problem, you need to focus on the structural dependencies first. Most people, when they talk about dependencies, other than feature teams, creating feature teams is a solution, one of the 7 strategies for addressing structural dependencies. But other than that, almost the entire rest of the conversation is all about instances. It's the instantiated dependencies and blockers. And people use the term blocker and dependency as if they're the same thing, and they are not, right? A dependency, a blocker is a dependency that moved into the block state. Right? I'm relying on the UX team to get this done by Monday. I have a dependency on the UX team. if they get it done on Monday, I never got blocked.
Yeah.
Right? If they didn't get it done on Monday, I got blocked. So, every dependency has the potential to become a blocker, but every blocker is the result of a failed coordination of a dependency.
Dependency, yeah.
So they're not the same. So most of the world focuses on how do we manage and visualize and deal with instantiated dependencies, and when they become blockers, how do we manage this? I'm like, great. What if you could avoid that altogether?
Yeah.
I mean,
So
what if I could
change it structurally? I mean, besides addressing structural changes, how do you help? I think one of the things that's very eye-opening for people is just when they see the dependencies,
Yes.
and when they see, just because a lot of stuff that we do is not transparent or visualized. So, what are some of the things? Maybe is there anything that people can do to at least create that awareness about that those dependencies exist? And then the follow-up question to that is, there's also economic side and economic consequences of those dependencies, which a lot of times will get leaders to listen more carefully when you're talking about, the economic impact of those dependencies.
Well, let's go in that order first.
Uh,
The economics of dependencies are pretty compelling. First, they affect three things principally. Dependencies, when they're out of control, impact your predictability. I mean, think about it. I mean, predictability, the state of knowing when something's going to happen, right? Well, in the presence of a large number of dependencies, pretty much predictability is gone, right? Because I can show you the math behind it, but for every dependency that we add to the problem, we cut in half the probability of completing what we said when we said we could do it. And it really goes up by exponentially. So if you cut in half every time, so if I have 6 dependencies, I have a 1 out of 64 chance of getting it done. So predictability at that level is really, really poor. So what's the benefit, company, to having better predictability? What's the value to you of actually being able to deliver when you said you could, the commitments that you make and you meet with your customers? So one of the large costs, one of the biggest impacts, is predictability. The second is cycle time.
I was going to say, yeah.
If I'm constantly getting blocked, right, then my analogy is click to click on the stopwatch. Start working on it, click. When you finish working on it, click. That click to click is going to be a pretty long time if you're getting blocked. I mean, most people who do value stream maps inside their company to look at a particular process, every time I do them, 90% of the time, the work is sitting idle because it's blocked by some dependency. I mean, what kind of improvement could you get if you could squeeze waste out of the 90% number? You think the value is in having your Scrum teams be 10, let's make our Scrum teams 10% more efficient at doing Scrum. Great. They're idle 90% of the time. They spend 10% of their time doing Scrum, which means you squeeze a 10% improvement out of the 10% of the time, you move the needle 1%. If I could figure out how to address the idle time, usually through dependencies in managing WIP better, then I could, 10% improvement there gives me a 9% return on investment immediately. We're watching the wrong thing. And then lastly, prioritization. Oftentimes, the existence of dependencies forces us to work in an order that is not optimal for us. I want to do A, B, C, then D, but I can't because there's some dependencies that are messing up that ordering. So now I have to do B, A, C, D, and that's worth 1/10 the value if I do it in that order. Well, that's unfortunate. Do A, B, C, D, I can't. The dependencies are going to block me if I try. Combine all that together and you realize your life cycle profits are taking a big hit. So if you're a senior executive, you ought to be staying up late at night worrying about your dependency problems.
Yeah. No, and like, what I also think is people don't realize is that dependencies create rework most of the time. And a lot of times because of the rework, it's a lot more costly to go back and do things. And I think if you just look at the dependencies in IT, if you look at the deployment pipeline, and how much just within that many companies, how many dependencies there are, and where the work stays Agile and many companies. I don't know what your experience has been, but nobody has any clue where those are. If you again just had an idea, where those bottlenecks are, where things are staying still, you would be able to address them. But it's almost like, we talk about MBA and we talk about even in IT, but like nobody has that really knowledge of that holistic view of what's going on and addressing really the underlying issues. It's almost like, at least in my experience, it's very reactive from a leadership, from people that are, in my opinion, accountable for addressing those dependencies.
Yeah, and I agree with that because they haven't modeled them, right? My approach to doing this is I work with companies like, so I do a dependency class, and then almost always after that, I get called by companies, oh, hey, could you do a workshop, facilitate a workshop to help us do what you talked about in the class? And the doing part is rather straightforward. It's like, let's create a model. I mean, just imagine like boxes and lines that said, here's our team, here's the UX team, and there's a line that connects the two that says, I got a structural dependency on them, right? But you don't stop there. Then you fill it out with data, right? You collect information like, well, how often do I make requests across that link? Do I go to the UX team once in a while, once a year, every day, right? How often am I doing that? What is the cost of delay if they block me? If for some reason I make a request and they don't fulfill it, right? How likely am I to get blocked? So imagine you're collecting all this like in a big old spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And then you start to analyze that. And you can start to say, now I understand the picture. And I may look at some of those dependencies and go, not worth my effort. Not worth doing anything about it, right? Because if there are structural dependencies, very often you'll require structural changes to fix them. And hence my point earlier, but if you don't have people up here committed, it's not going to work, because you're going to get to a point like, well, we're going to have to restructure these teams. Chances are the people on the teams can't make that decision on their own.
Yeah.
It's got to go up here. And if you hit that ceiling, then you're not going to be successul, because you're going to be stuck in the structural situation you're at. So model it, analyze it.
Yeah, but like, I don't know, you have a lot more experience than I do, but like in what I'm seeing is lack of that awareness, like at that level. So I don't know if it's like COO or somebody who's responsible for that organizational architecture, understanding these dependencies and then helping others understand it. I just don't see it in organizations. I don't see the maturity of leadership to understand and look for those things. Do you see that, maybe on maturity or maybe on the curve? Like, what percentage would you say of companies actually have leaders that understand it? Because if the dependencies and everything that we've been talking about here is at the core of issues and impeding agility, and then if we have like 5% of people in companies actually understanding this, then that's an impediment to the agility. Or how do you see it?
Or I'll say it the way it's coming to my mind right now. I mean, they're praying at the myth. They're praying at the altar of the dependency myths. They believe certain myths about dependencies are true, and therefore they believe that it is a manageable problem because they believe these myths are true. And the problem is they're myths and they're not true.
Or assumptions. I saw you talked about assumptions. Is that a assumption, and what type of assumption would that be?
Well, I'll give you some examples of the assumptions, these myths that they're like, one size solution will fit all types of dependency problems.
Yeah.
So if I just have a program board up on the wall to show my dependencies and have red string that connects cards, it'll work for a small number of dependencies. It'll work for a large number. No, it won't. It'll almost certainly work for a small number of dependencies. Anybody who's ever done that with a large number of red pieces of yarn up there knows it doesn't work. All right, so that's one myth. Another myth would be, if we could just figure out what all the dependencies are, that mostly solves the problem. Wrong. It doesn't at all. The problem isn't our inability to identify the dependencies. I mean, look, I know I have a dependency on the UX team. It's not like that was magic. It's like I didn't know that. I knew that. The problem is this. in the presence of a large number of dependencies within the organization, it's the asynchronicity that kills you. It's the when. I know that the UX team has to do this work. What I don't know is when they're going to do it. And I don't control the when because it's a shared dependency. So they think if you identify them, then you're good, won't work. Or that, oh, you know what, this is just a problem with project management. If we just hired better project managers and they used more project management process and had better tool support, we could totally get on top of this dependency problem and sort it out. That's got to be one of the king of the myths. No, yeah, no, that's not the problem. This is not a failure of project management. At large scale, this falls under the category of don't do that, right? You're not going to fix it with more project managers. So it's these kind of myths. There's at least 9 that I identify and talk about. And the problem is some of them are really damaging, like centralized demand management. Oh my goodness, the killer in most large companies that I visit. Oh, we're going to do this. It works brilliantly. I had a call 2 weeks ago with a company. They start describing their problem. They're like 2 minutes. I'm like, I go, centralized demand management. Like, what's that? I go, let me explain what you're going to tell me next. And you tell me if this is accurate. And I describe it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm like, so what should we do? I go, stop doing that. Like, well, no, we have you on this call because we want you to help us figure out how to make it work. I go, I can't because it won't work. Right? How do you know that? Well, give me a reference. Show me papers that say it won't work. Okay, I don't have any papers at all. What I have is time in the trenches with a lot of big companies that have tried to do exactly what you're trying to do now. And I can tell you the 15 reasons it won't work. And you can tell me whether or not you think those are going to be problems for you. At the end of the day, like, yeah, we have a problem, don't we? Like, yeah, you do. Because you believe this myth that this will solve your problem, and it won't. To me, that's what's going on at the executive level. It's like, oh, this is a manageable problem, people. Just look, if you can't do the job right, I'll hire people who can.
And it goes back maybe to those, it's a leadership, it's a mindset. And maybe we have about 10 more minutes left. I do want to get one more thing in here, which is related to what we've been talking about so far, which is not all cross-functional teams are created equally. And you talked about how it's important to have cross-functional teams that are composed of T-shaped individuals, essentially, minimize those dependencies by having people that can, get stuff done and not rely on UX department to finish work. Could you maybe elaborate on that topic a little bit and why is it important? I call it almost like, maturity 1 team and maturity 2 team, like where you have cross-functional team with a bunch of specialists on like developers and testers. I joke around. I had maybe it was 7-8 years ago when developer told me that testing is below their pay grade, that they want to test because they were senior developer. It was much better to start an item, for next sprint than actually help the team test to get the stuff done. And maybe that's bunch of people that are silos and special in a cross-functional team versus actually having people that help each other, that are developing those T-shaped skills and developing other skills that can help their teams deliver.
Yeah, to me, this is a very important topic, and it's one of the 7 strategies for addressing structural dependencies. Let's make sure everybody's clear on the terms, right? Because to me, cross-functionality is a concept that should apply at an ecosystem and at a team level. And I want to put an adjective in front of it. Completely cross-functional is my goal. So the idea is if a team is completely cross-functional, it has all the skills on the team to achieve that team's definition of done. Whatever that might happen to be, they can get it done. So if I need UX designs to happen, then darn it, I got a UX design person on my team. Otherwise, we would not be cross-functionally complete, and I'd have to be tearing my Post-it notes, right, to make that happen. So that, and then at an ecosystem level, I want the same thing. So if I bring all these people from across the organization together into one ecosystem, that ecosystem should be completely cross-functional in its abilities. You typically do not apply the term completely cross-functional to an individual. Some people try, oh, they're a full stack engineer. And the idea was, well, they're supposed to be able to do work at any different layer of their tech stack. And they might, don't get me wrong, but do they also do the legal work? And do they do the design work? So yeah, they're not completely cross-functional. They may be T-shaped, right?
Yeah.
T-shaping, on the other hand, typically applies to the individual, not to the ecosystem or the team, although you'll hear people use it at an ecosystem or team level. At an ecosystem, it would mean our ecosystem can do more than one type of work. At a team level, it could be, oh, our team can work on product A or product B, right? That might be how you hear people using T-shaping at a team
So
level.
essentially, T-shape doesn't really address dependencies. When you say you have cross-functional teams, that you start addressing dependencies, because you're saying you need to have everything. Plus, when you add the T-shape individual layer to it, it gives you more options to minimize those dependencies. Yeah.
So it makes you more resilient. So for everybody's knowledge, right, T-shape just means vertically deep in some area and can work outside their area, but wouldn't be as deep. So they're broad. The benefits of having individuals on your team that are T-shaped, you actually do get a dependency benefit, but it reduces the structural dependencies that would happen inside, right? So think about it. Let me start with the instantiated dependencies. There's only one person on our team that does testing. So all the testing work has to go to that individual. There's a dependency within our team on that individual. And if we T-shaped up people so that more than one person could do that, I no longer have that unique dependency on that one individual. A bunch of people can do it. And the second big benefit I get is resiliency. If only one person can do it, what happens if she goes out sick? I guess it doesn't get done and we don't meet our sprint goal. So teams that have people that are comprised of T-shaped skills are more resilient when things go wrong and can better deal with the variability of the work that is presented to the team from sprint to sprint. This sprint, we got a little bit more database work in the stories. In the next sprint, we're going to have a little bit more UI work, but that's okay because people are T-shaped and they can swarm to where the work is. So I get that kinds of benefits, right, by doing it. So whenever possible, what I'm looking for is completely cross-functional ecosystems and teams and somewhat T-shaped people.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be completely T-shaped because then people are going to freak out and go, oh, you mean everybody can do every task? I'm like, I did not say that. I did not need that. I'm just saying, wouldn't it be nice if they could do more than one thing, but do a few things?
Yeah, no, that's I think really important point, and also not forcing people to do something that they don't want to develop, right? Like in a sense, if somebody doesn't want to test, then it's waste of everybody's time to get people, and that's a lot of times it might go back to the mindset where somebody just has that belief or that assumption they don't want to develop certain skill. So I think that's where you have to have a discussion as a team. Where are our gaps and what are we going to do? How are we going to, if we only have one tester and nobody wants to test, what options do we have? How are we going to deal with this as a team?
Right. Development of those skills is really a team focus.
Yeah. What would you like to leave us as it's been almost an hour. What parting message would you like to leave us with here? Anything that I didn't maybe ask you, or anything that you usually maybe tell people?
I actually think you hit on the topics that to me are the most important today. To me, it's all about structuring for flow at scale. Now, my focus on dependencies is because it's like the killer problem that's preventing that. But dependencies aren't my goal. Structuring for flow at scale is my goal. And I'm just trying to figure out what in the world's getting in my way that's making it difficult for pretty much every company I visit. So if you want to be successful, and I'll define what I mean, meet your targeted business outcomes. So if your company's got like OKRs, then aligning with those, then you better figure out what's getting in the way of you achieving those goals. And if you're trying to do it at scale, my guess is it's dependencies and too much whipping your system are the things getting your way. So go focus on those.